She's never going to amount to anything. My mother-in-law said it at the dinner table. Not whispered. Not muttered under her breath. Said it out loud, with her wineglass halfway to her lips, like she was commenting on the weather. My husband didn't look up from his plate. My name is Thea Callahan. I'm 31. I grew up in Kitchener, Ontario, the second daughter of a retired teacher and a man who fixed furnaces for 30 years until his knees gave out. We weren't rich. We weren't struggling. We were the kind of family that saved for things, waited for sales, and said thank you when someone held the door. I thought that was normal. I married into a family that thought it made me lesser. My mother-in-law has a house in Oakville, the kind of house with a mudroom and a wine cellar and a second dishwasher. She's never had a job title that didn't include the word chair or director. She volunteers for things the way other people collect trophies. She once told me early on that she admired self-made women. I didn't realize until much later that she only meant women who were self-made in ways she could recognize. My husband's sister, my sister-in-law, is beautiful in the way that photographs well. She's the kind of person who sends group texts at 7 in the morning and expects everyone to respond with enthusiasm. She called me quirky the first time we met, which in that family was not a compliment. I worked in environmental law. Specifically, I negotiated impact assessments for resource projects across Northern Ontario and parts of the Northwest Territories. It's slow, detailed, often invisible work. Nothing about it sounds glamorous at a dinner party. When people asked what I did, I'd explain it once, watch their eyes glaze, and change the subject. My mother-in-law once introduced me to her book club friends as the one who does something with the environment. She said it with a small laugh, like the vagueness was charming. I let it go. I always let it go. My husband said she meant well. He said that was just how she talked. He said I was too sensitive. I wonder sometimes if the marriages that fall apart slowly are worse than the ones that end all at once. Ours was the slow kind. Years of small moments where I felt myself folding, making myself smaller, taking up less space at tables that didn't want me there anyway. My husband loved me, I think. The way some people love a houseplant? Present. Assumed. Undemanding until it started to die. The night everything changed was a Saturday in late October. His parents were celebrating their 40th anniversary, a dinner party at the Oakville house. Catered, obviously. 50-some guests, the good china, little place cards in silver holders. I wore a dark green dress I'd bought on sale and told no one. I was standing near the kitchen doorway when I heard my mother-in-law talking to someone in the next room. Her voice carries in that house. It always has. Honestly, she said, I don't know what he was thinking. She's perfectly nice, but she's never going to amount to anything. She just doesn't have that drive, you know, that ambition. A pause. Then, he could have done so much better. The person she was talking to said something I couldn't make out. My mother-in-law laughed. No, he's loyal. That's the problem. He'll stay long past when he should. I stood there with a glass of sparkling water in my hand, not shaking. That surprised me. My pulse was steady. I think some part of me had been waiting for years to finally hear it said plainly. I walked back to the sitting room. My husband was across the room talking to his father, laughing at something. When he looked over at me, he smiled. I smiled back. I didn't tell him what I'd heard. Not that night. What my mother-in-law didn't know, what almost no one in that family knew, was what I actually did at work, not the job title. They knew that, vaguely, but the weight of it. The fact that I had spent the past 4 years as the lead negotiator on one of the largest proposed mineral extraction projects in Northern Ontario. 3 companies involved. Federal oversight. A file so sensitive it had its own NDAs. My name appeared in documents I wasn't allowed to keep copies of at home. I signed things my mother-in-law would not have understood and probably would not have believed. I also didn't tell them that, 8 months before this party, I'd begun quietly interviewing for a position in Vancouver. Director of Environmental Affairs at a Crown corporation. The kind of role that changes what the rest of your career looks like. I hadn't told my husband either. That was his own problem. But I had stopped telling him things the way you stop unlocking a door when you realize you've lost the key. I got the offer the week before the anniversary dinner. I hadn't accepted it yet. I was still deciding. My mother-in-law gave a toast that night. She thanked everyone for coming, talked about 40 years of love and commitment, looked at her husband with that practiced warmth she's so good at. She mentioned her son. She mentioned her daughter. She mentioned several other people by name. She thanked the family members who had joined them over the years as a group, collective, unnamed. My sister-in-law caught my eye across the table and gave me a sympathetic half smile, the kind that says I know, but also I'm not going to say anything. The woman sitting 2 seats from me had been quiet through most of dinner. She was somewhere in her late 50s, silver hair, reading glasses on a chain. She'd been introduced earlier as a colleague of my father-in-law's from his years at Queen's Park. She'd been watching the room the way someone watches a play they've already read. When the toast ended and the noise level climbed again, she leaned slightly in my direction. "You're in environmental law," she said. Not a question. "Yes." "Which file?" she asked. Something shifted. I looked at her more carefully. "I'm not really able to get into specifics at a dinner party." She nodded, like that confirmed something. "I know the file," she said quietly. "I'd been on the oversight side. I recognized your name from the signatory list." She paused. "You do exceptional work." I didn't say anything for a moment. The noise of the party moved around us like water. "Thank you," I said. She picked up her wine glass. "They don't know what you do," she said. "Not unkind, just observational." "No," I said. "They don't." She looked toward my mother-in-law, who was laughing with someone near the fireplace. Then she looked back at me. "That's an interesting choice," she said. I thought about that word for the rest of the night. Choice. I had chosen silence. I had chosen smallness. I had let them define me because it was easier than the argument, and somewhere along the way, I had started to believe the version of me they were describing. I drove home that night while my husband slept in the passenger seat. He did that. Fell asleep in cars. Always had. I used to find it endearing. I used to feel trusted, like I was someone who could be relied on to get you home safe. That night, the highway lights came and went, and I thought, I have been carrying this family's version of me for 6 years. I put it down somewhere along the 403 without fully realizing I was doing it. 3 days later, I accepted the Vancouver position. I told my husband on a Tuesday evening after dinner, while he was still at the kitchen table. I told him clearly. I told him what the role was, what it would mean, and that I had been working toward it for over a year. I watched his face go through several expressions. The last one was the one that told me what I needed to know. "You should have told me you were interviewing," he said. "I should have," I agreed, "but you didn't ask what I was working on. You haven't in a while." He didn't have a response to that. I told him I wasn't asking him to move. I told him I understood if he didn't want to. I told him I was going regardless. The next week was hard. Not screaming hard. The quiet kind of hard, which is worse. His mother called me twice. I didn't answer. She left one voicemail that was mostly just her saying my name in a tone that implied the name itself was a disappointment. The conversation that changed things happened at my in-laws' house on a Sunday, 10 days after I'd told my husband. He'd told them, which I had expected. They asked us to come for brunch, and I agreed, because I believed in finishing things properly. My mother-in-law had been warm all morning, strategically warm. She complimented my hair. She offered me the good coffee. She told me about her friend's daughter who had also gone through a career transition, and how it had all worked out in the end. It took me a moment to understand she was talking about me in the third person while looking at me directly. My father-in-law was quieter than usual. He kept glancing toward the kitchen window. My sister-in-law arrived at 11:30, unannounced. which told me the whole thing had been coordinated. We sat in the living room. My husband was on the couch beside his mother. I was in the chair that always felt too far from the center of things. My mother-in-law folded her hands. "Thea," she said, "we just want to understand what's going on. We're your family too." She said it like she meant it. She's very good at that. "I took a role in Vancouver," I said. "It's a significant step in my career. I'm proud of it. But your life is here," she said. I let that sit for a second. "My life has been here," I said. "That's not the same thing." My sister-in-law shifted on the couch. "It just feels very sudden," she said. "Like, we didn't even know you were thinking about this." I looked at her. "I've been working in environmental law for 9 years. This role is what that work was building toward. I didn't hide it. Nobody asked." My mother-in-law smiled in the way she smiles when she's about to reframe something. "We've always supported you, Thea. I hope you know that. And I don't know why that specific sentence was the one that finally loosened something in me. After years of being unnamed in toasts, introduced as a category rather than a person, called someone who would never amount to anything in a room she thought I wasn't in, I don't know why 'we've always supported you' was the sentence that broke it. Maybe because it was so far from true, and she said it so easily. 'You told someone at your anniversary party that I was never going to amount to anything,' I said. 'That your son could have done better.'" The room went very still. My husband looked at me, then at his mother. My mother-in-law's face did something complicated. Not guilt. More like recalculation. "I don't know where you heard something like that," she said. Her voice was completely steady. "From the kitchen doorway," I said. "You were talking to the woman in the blue blazer. You said I don't have drive or ambition. You said he'll stay long past when he should." My sister-in-law looked at the floor. That told me she'd heard the same thing or something like it before. My husband said quietly, "Mom." Just the one word. My mother-in-law lifted her chin. "I may have expressed some concern," she said. "That's not the same as—" "I know what you said," I said. "I wasn't angry. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I'd had 10 days with this information. And I'd decided something during those 10 days. I'm not asking you to take it back. I'm telling you I heard it. And I want you to understand who you were talking about." I told them about the file. I told them about the Crown Corporation. I told them what my title would be in Vancouver and what that meant in terms of scope and influence. I told them about the signatory lists and the federal oversight and the work that had been invisible to them for years because no one had ever asked what I was doing with my time. My father-in-law stared at the window for a long moment. Then he said, "I had no idea." "I know," I said. "Most people don't." My mother-in-law didn't speak for a while. When she did, she said, "Thea, I think this family has failed to appreciate you." It was the most accurate thing she had ever said to me. I also understood it was not an apology. It was damage control. "There is a difference." "Yes," I said. "You have?" I stood up. My husband stood up too, almost reflexively, and then seemed uncertain where to go. I looked at him for a long moment. He looked back at me with an expression I hadn't seen from him in years. Something open and confused, like he was seeing a map of a place he'd thought he knew. "I'm leaving on the 14th, I said. "I hope you'll come with me. I mean that. But I'm going either way." I drove back to our house alone. He stayed for another hour, then came home and sat across from me at the kitchen table, the way he had at the beginning of all our serious conversations, back when we still had them. "Did you hear what she said?" he asked. Not really a question. "I've been hearing it for 6 years," I said. "I just never told you." He asked me why not. I told him the truth, that I had wanted peace more than honesty, that I had learned to disappear in that family, the way you learn to hold your breath in a room with bad air, that it stopped feeling like a choice at some point and started feeling like just how things were. He was quiet for a long time. Then, I should have asked more. Yes, I said, about the work, about how you were doing. About a lot of things, I said, not unkindly. He came to Vancouver. It took him 2 weeks to decide, and I won't pretend those 2 weeks were easy or that everything repaired itself because he made that choice. Marriages don't work like light switches. What happened between us was more like construction, slow, loud, sometimes cold. Sometimes you couldn't see the shape of what you were building until you were already standing in it. My mother-in-law called me 6 weeks after I started the new role. She said she'd been reading about the project I was leading. Said a friend had forwarded her an article from the Globe. She said she was impressed. I thanked her. I kept it brief. She asked if I was happy. I thought about the office in Vancouver with the view of the inlet, the team I was building, the negotiations I was finally able to lead without someone else's signature above mine, the version of myself that didn't shrink at dinner tables. Yes, I said, I am. She didn't know what to do with that, I think. She was expecting something else, relief maybe, or gratitude, or some sign that I needed her approval to confirm what I already knew. I didn't give her that. There's a particular kind of freedom in being finally seen by people who underestimated you, and choosing not to let their seeing define you either. The approval I had wanted from that family for 6 years arrived too late to be the thing that mattered. By the time they understood who I was, I already did. My husband and I are still figuring out what we are. That's the true part. The part that doesn't wrap up cleanly. Some nights we sit on the balcony of the apartment we found in East Vancouver and talk the way we used to, before we stopped. Other nights the distance is still there, quieter now but present. We're honest with each other in ways we weren't before. That's something. That might be enough. We're still deciding. I don't think about my mother-in-law's words at that party the way I used to. They still land when they surface. I'm not made of stone. But they land differently now. Less like a verdict. More like evidence of someone else's limited imagination. She was wrong about me. She was wrong about what ambition looks like, about what drive looks like, about what it means to build something that matters. She was wrong because she only knew how to see the version of me that stayed quiet. I stopped being that version of me in a car on the 403 in October, somewhere between the city I'd been shrinking in and the one I was finally driving toward. Some people take years to find the room they were always supposed to be in. Some people never find it. I drove across the country in November with 2 suitcases and a box of files and a job title nobody in my old life saw coming. That felt like enough. That felt finally like me,